They say every woman dreams of her wedding day. The white dress, the vows, the promise of forever. Brittany Matthews had all of that. What the fairy tales don't tell you is that sometimes, forever is just a beautifully wrapped lie. This is the story of a woman who lost everything in one night, and how a mysterious stranger became the father of her children without either of them knowing it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's take you back to where it all began. 6 months into a marriage that was already dead. The morning sun filtered through the silk curtains of the master bedroom. Well, Brittany's bedroom. Richard hadn't slept there for weeks. 3 months to be exact, but who was counting? All right, she was. Brittany stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the collar of her designer blouse. The woman staring back at her looked perfect. Immaculate makeup, hair styled just so, expensive clothes that whispered old money. But her eyes looked tired.
Sad.
Lonely. Still admiring yourself, I see. Brittany didn't flinch. She'd grown used to the venom in her stepsister Veronica's voice. Veronica leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. "Good morning to you too, Veronica," Brittany said quietly, gathering her purse. "Is it?" Veronica sauntered into the room like she owned it. In many ways, she acted like she did. "I saw Richard leave early this morning. Another business trip?" The quotation marks in her tone were unmistakable. They both knew what Richard's business trips really meant. Late nights, perfume that wasn't Brittany's, lipstick stains on collar shirts he'd carelessly tossed in the laundry. "What do you want, Veronica?" "Just checking on my dear sister," Veronica said, examining her manicured nails. "After all, it must be so hard being married for 6 months and still being a don't." Brittany's voice came out sharper than intended. Veronica laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Oh, touchy. Does the truth hurt, Brittany? Does it bother you that your own husband won't touch you? That he finds you so undesirable?" Brittany's hands clenched around her purse strap. Veronica didn't know. She couldn't know how those words carved into her like a knife. How many nights Brittany had lain awake wondering what was wrong with her. Why her own husband looked at her with such cold indifference. "Richard and I are fine," Brittany lied. "Sure you are." Veronica moved closer, her perfume, too strong, too sweet, invading Brittany's space. "You know what I think? I think he married you for your money, for the Matthews fortune. And now that he has access to everything through you, well, you've served your purpose, haven't you?" Welcome back to Urban Folks TV channel. Before we continue with this story, let us know in the comment section where you are watching from. And if you are new here, hit the like and subscribe button. Get out of my room. It's not really your room though, is it? This whole house belongs to the family trust. And family includes me. Veronica smiled, showing too many teeth. "Don't forget, little sister. Daddy left everything to both of us. Well, mostly to you, but I have my ways of getting what I deserve." Before Brittany could respond, Veronica glided out, leaving behind the ghost of her perfume and the weight of her words. Brittany sank onto the edge of the bed, her carefully constructed composure cracking. Veronica was right about one thing. Their father had left Brittany everything when he died 2 years ago. The Matthews fortune, the properties, the investments. It was supposed to be her security, her legacy. Instead, it felt like a cage. Brittany spent the day at the charity foundation she'd started in her father's name. It was the one thing that still gave her purpose, helping underprivileged children get access to education. The one thing that made her feel like she was more than just a trophy wife collecting dust. When she returned home that evening, the mansion was unusually quiet. The staff had been given the night off, odd, since it was only Thursday. Richard's car was in the driveway, which was even more unusual. He rarely came home before midnight anymore. "Richard," Brittany called out, setting her keys on the marble entryway table. "In the dining room, darling." Darling. He never called her that. Her skin prickled with unease as she walked toward the dining room, her heels clicking against the Italian marble floors. The scene that greeted her was almost romantic. Almost. Candles flickered on the long dining table, set for two. Richard stood by the window, looking devastatingly handsome in his tailored suit, a glass of wine in his hand. "What's all this?" Brittany asked, confusion evident in her voice. He turned, and for a moment, she saw a flash of something in his eyes. Guilt? No, it passed too quickly. Can't a husband surprise his wife with a nice dinner? Red flags waved frantically in Brittany's mind, but she was so starved for his attention, so desperate for a sign that their marriage could be salvaged, that she ignored them. "It's lovely," she said softly, moving to the table. Richard pulled out her chair. Another thing he never did, and she sat, feeling like she was in some sort of bizarre play where everyone knew their lines except her. "I've been thinking," he said, settling into his own chair. "I've been distant, neglectful. You deserve better, Brittany." Her heart leapt stupidly in her chest. "Richard, let me finish." He reached across the table, taking her hand. His touch was warm, but something about it felt wrong, calculated. "I want us to start over, to really be husband and wife. Tonight." Heat rushed to her cheeks. After 6 months of rejection, of sleeping in separate rooms, of wondering if something was wrong with her, he wanted her? I'd like that," she whispered. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Let's have some wine first. To new beginnings." He poured from an already opened bottle, a vintage she recognized from her father's collection. Richard raised his glass, and she raised hers, the crystal catching the candlelight. "To us," he said. "To us," she echoed, and they drank. The wine tasted slightly off, bitter underneath the expensive vintage, but Brittany assumed it was her nerves. She took another sip, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. They ate in relative silence, Richard making small talk about his day, asking about the foundation. He was being so attentive, so present. Why did it feel like a performance? "You seem tense," he observed, refilling her wine glass. "Drink up. It'll help you relax." She obeyed, drinking more than she normally would. The room began to feel warm, the candlelight swimming slightly at the edges of her vision. "Richard, I feel strange," she said, her words coming out slower than intended. "It's just the wine, darling. Strong vintage. Come, let's move to the sitting room." He helped her up, his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him because suddenly her legs didn't quite work the way they should. The hallway seemed longer than usual, the walls tilting at odd angles. "What's happening?" she slurred. "Shoo, just relax. Everything's going to be fine." But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. The world was spinning. Her limbs felt like lead, and through the fog descending over her mind, she heard another voice. "Veronica, is she out yet?" "Almost," Richard replied, his voice cold now, the warmth from dinner completely gone. "Help me get her upstairs." "Upstairs?" No, something was very wrong. Brittany tried to speak, to pull away, but her body wouldn't obey. She was trapped in her own skin, conscious but paralyzed, aware but powerless. "Perfect," Veronica's voice purred. "The plan is working beautifully." "Plan? What plan?" They half carried, half dragged her up the stairs. She wanted to scream, to fight, but she could only manage weak, incoherent sounds. Tears leaked from her eyes as terror flooded through her. "Stop crying," Richard snapped. "You brought this on yourself. Did you really think I married you for love? You're just a means to an end, Brittany. A very wealthy means to an end." His words cut through the fog, each one a dagger to her heart. "Once we get the divorce," Veronica added cheerfully, "Richard and I can finally be together, and with the evidence we're creating tonight, you won't get a penny." Adultery is such an ugly word, isn't it? Adultery? But she'd never. They pushed open a door. Not her bedroom, a guest room she never used. And there, waiting in the shadows, was a figure she couldn't quite make out through her drugged haze. "She's all yours," Richard said to the stranger. "Make sure it looks convincing. We'll have the photographer ready." "No. No. No. No." Brittany tried to struggle, but her body was a cage she couldn't escape from. The last thing she remembered before the darkness completely claimed her was Veronica's laughter, Richard's cold eyes, and the feeling of being lowered onto unfamiliar sheets. Then nothing. But what Brittany didn't know, what she couldn't know in her drugged state, was that the man in the shadows wasn't part of Richard's plan. The actual man Richard had hired had gotten cold feet at the last moment and fled. In the chaos and darkness, Richard and Veronica had grabbed the wrong person from the hallway, a guest who had arrived at the estate by mistake, looking for a business associate. That man was Anthony James, the youngest billionaire in the country, and he was just as drugged as Brittany was. Brittany woke to blinding sunlight and a pounding headache that felt like her skull was splitting open. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the memories came flooding back. The dinner, the wine, Richard and Veronica's voices, the stranger in the shadows. She bolted upright and immediately regretted it as nausea rolled through her. She was in the guest bedroom, that much was clear. But she wasn't alone. Next to her, tangled in the sheets, was a man. She couldn't see his face. He was turned away from her, his back bare, his dark hair tousled. But he was definitely there, definitely real. Oh God, what had happened? What had they done to her? Brittany looked down at herself and her worst fears were confirmed. Her clothes from last night were gone. She was wearing nothing. The sheets barely covered her. Her hands shook as she grabbed for something, anything to cover herself. A shirt, his shirt, lay on the floor. She pulled it on with trembling fingers, her mind racing. Had they? The soreness between her legs answered that question. Horror and violation washed over her in waves so strong she thought she might be sick. She'd been drugged by her own husband and stepsister. And they'd arranged for this. For her to wake up in bed with a stranger. The man beside her stirred, beginning to wake. Brittany couldn't face him, couldn't face whatever this was. She stumbled out of bed, grabbed her clothes scattered across the floor, and ran. She made it to her own bedroom and locked the door behind her, sliding down against it as sobs racked her body. Her virginity, the one thing she'd been saving, the one thing that had been hers, was gone. Stolen. Taken by a stranger whose face she hadn't even seen. The tears came harder, but she forced herself to move. She had to shower, had to wash away the evidence of last night, the feeling of violation. The door handle rattled violently. Brittany! Richard's voice boomed from the other side. Open this door right now. She froze, her heart hammering. I know what you did, he continued, his voice dripping with false outrage. How could you betray me like this? Footsteps, multiple footsteps, echoed in the hallway. Through her door, she could hear Veronica's voice, higher pitched and excited. Oh my God, Richard. I'm so sorry. I knew something was going on, but I never imagined. Call my lawyer, Richard commanded someone. I want her out of this house. I want a divorce. I won't be made a fool of by some cheating. I didn't cheat. Brittany screamed through the door, her voice breaking. You drugged me. You and Veronica, you. Listen to her. Veronica laughed, making up wild accusations. Drugged? Really, Brittany? Is that the best you can do? I have proof, Richard said coldly. Photos. Evidence. You in bed with another man. Your lover. How long has this been going on, Brittany? How long have you been making me look like an idiot? That's not. You don't understand. But her protests fell on deaf ears. Through the door, she could hear Richard giving orders to staff, calling his lawyer, making arrangements. The machine he'd set in motion wouldn't be stopped by the truth. He'd created his narrative, and in the court of public opinion, she'd already been convicted. Brittany slid to the floor, her back against the door, and wrapped her arms around herself. In the span of one night, her entire world had shattered. She'd been drugged, violated, and now she was being framed as an adulteress. And the worst part? She didn't even know who the man in that bed had been. She hadn't seen his face, couldn't identify him if her life depended on it. He was a ghost, a shadow, a stranger who'd unknowingly become part of her destruction. Anthony James woke up in his penthouse suite with the worst headache of his life and a complete blank where the previous night should have been. The last thing he remembered was arriving at an estate for what was supposed to be a business meeting, accepting a drink from someone he thought was the host, and then nothing. He sat up slowly, his head pounding, and noticed something odd. His clothes from yesterday were disheveled, and there were scratches on his back he couldn't explain. What the hell had happened? Anthony stumbled to the bathroom and caught sight of himself in the mirror. He looked like he'd been through a war. His usually impeccable appearance was a mess, and there on his neck was a mark. A hickey. He never let women leave marks. Never lost control like that. So why couldn't he remember anything? As he stood there, trying to piece together the fragments of the previous night, one image kept flashing through his drug-addled memories. A woman. Beautiful. Terrified. Her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Who was she? And why did he have the overwhelming urge to find her again? Outside Brittany's locked bedroom door, she could hear Richard already spinning his story to anyone who would listen. The wronged husband. The victim of a cheating wife. What she didn't know then was that this was only the beginning. That the losses would pile up until she had nothing left. That she'd lose her home, her money, her dignity, everything her father had left her. She also didn't know that the stranger from that night, the man whose face she never saw, was Anthony James, the youngest billionaire in the country. A man who would spend the next 4 years searching for her. Or that in her womb, already beginning their journey to life, were 2 tiny beings. His sons. Their sons. But that morning, locked in her bedroom while her world collapsed around her, Brittany knew none of this. All she knew was pain, betrayal, and the terrible, crushing weight of helplessness. This was Brittany Matthews, and this was the day her life ended. Before it could begin again. What happens next? Will Brittany escape with anything left? Who was the mysterious man in her bed? Don't forget to like, subscribe to Urban Folks TV channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Comment below. What would you do if you were Brittany? Episode 2. The Night Everything Changed. Coming soon.